very much. What a great story. It's such a great story that when you're preaching, you almost don't want the story read out beforehand, because you could tell the story as part of the sermon and almost let it stand for itself. You wouldn't need to say much else. And I suggested that to Joseph, but of course when you're leading the service you think the same thing. If we can just read out that story, I'm not going to have to do anything else. So you can tell who won the arguments, because we've heard the story. And I'm going to retell it and hopefully get us into imagining being there. And you may also think that this story does demand a little bit of explanation, particularly when it comes to that dream and what it means for us today. But let's start about thinking what it means for us today. What sort of things keep you awake at night? And those of us who are parents, probably children, our children come first to mind. You know, there's that saying, you're only as happy as your least happy child. Are you worried about their future in this difficult world that we were praying about? Are you worried about their financial future and what you can do to help set them up? Are you worried about your relationship with your children? Will they remember you when you're older? Or maybe you're just worried about your reputation in general, what other people think about you. Or maybe it's your career and financial security. All these things seem to have been turning around in Nebuchadnezzar's mind as we read this chapter. And if you've got ambitions to material wealth and career success, however much God answers those dreams, you're not going to do as well as Nebuchadnezzar had done. He was the most powerful and wealthy man in the world. He's thought to be in the top 20 of the most powerful and rich men ever to have lived. And yet still, he's tossing and turning in his bed at night, worrying about the future. And as so often happens when we're worrying about things deep down, it comes out in our dreams. And he had one recurring dream that kept coming back to him. He sort of knew what it meant, but he didn't quite know what it meant. And I think it's Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung who are famous in the 20th century for analysing dreams and helping us to understand our fears and anxieties. And if you've ever had counselling, maybe the counsellors asked you to and talked through your dreams with you. But that wasn't a new thing that they discovered. People have known that since Old Testament days. And Nebuchadnezzar had a whole army of people to interpret his dreams for him. We're told enchanters, sorcerers, magicians, and astrologers. A whole multidisciplinary team of dream interpreters. So no problem, that's all in a day's work for them. He sends for them all, but there's one snag. This time he's not going to tell them the dream at all. They have to tell him the dream and then interpret it. Why do you think he did that? You know, sometimes we can't remember our dreams. We're just left with this sense of unease. We know what's worrying us, or we're not quite sure. We can't remember the dream. Maybe he couldn't remember it. Or maybe he was a bit suspicious of this team of professionals. He says to them, you've conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things in the past. Maybe he wanted to test them. But I think there's a deeper reason why Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't tell them what the dream was, and it's the key to understanding the whole message of this chapter, and indeed the whole message of the dream, so we'll come back to it. But whatever the reason he refused to tell them, he'd made up his mind quite firmly. This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and then interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. So how would you have felt if you'd been given this impossible task as one of Nebuchadnezzar's wise men? Well, we know what they felt. They felt blind panic. Let's have the first slide if we can, please. Wow, it worked. So I had to preach at Stoke Newington Baptist Church a couple of weeks ago in front of my assessor, the guy that's helping me come through the pastoral training. And this is like after 2 years, I have to go and preach in front of him and then go for the feedback. That's quite nerve-wracking, I can tell you. When you stand up here, you feel quite vulnerable. And I was really waiting for the critical analysis of my sermon. But he was very kind and encouraging and told me all the good things. And then said, I do have one criticism. Your PowerPoint size, the text is too small. So I hope you noticed that. So I breathed a sigh of relief that I've increased the size of the... But anyway, back to these wise men who are in a panic, not surprisingly. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. The verses I put up here on these PowerPoints are ones which I think emphasize the key message of this story, which will hopefully come out as we go through it. That is a reasonable statement, isn't it? We're not mind readers. But the king got angrier and angrier. He was angry and furious. The king is in a blind rage. The wise men are in a blind panic. Only one man stands calm. An 18-year-old Hebrew slave not long arrived into this group of advisors. He keeps calm. He says, what seems to be the problem here? Why has the king issued such a harsh decree? And when he finds out, he doesn't blunder in. He takes his time. He asks to see the king, and he asks the king for more time. He just calms the situation down. And what does he do when he's gained that time? He doesn't go off and pray and fast by himself. He finds his friends. Daniel is a leader. He gathers people around him. And that's why he's used greatly by God. So he gathers his 3 friends that we read about last week, and they have a prayer meeting. And it's a pretty urgent prayer meeting because they are in this group. They are under sentence of death as well. And it says he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And God answered their prayer. He heard their prayer and answered. And it seems like they had an all-night prayer meeting. And during that night, God revealed the mystery to Daniel. He revealed the dream and the meaning of the dream. And Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, and Richard used it for his prayer, but we'll read it again because it's crucial to understanding this passage. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. And he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. So God has heard Daniel's prayer. He's given Daniel the answer to the dream and the meaning of it. So what does Daniel do next? Well, he asks to be taken to the king to give the interpretation. And what are his first words? After his praise to God, what are his first words to the Babylonian court? Take me to the king and I will interpret his dream for him. This is my moment of glory. Because those were his second words, not his first words. His first words were these: do not execute the wise men of Babylon. It's easy to forget when we think about that unholy multidisciplinary team of sorcerers, magicians, astrologers, and enchanters, that Daniel was one of these people. And it seems like it wasn't just because he was forced into it. He seems to have made friends with these people. His first concern is to save their lives, and that's very important to us. In fact, as we go through the book of Daniel, it's so important for us in today's society. I heard Krish Kandiah talking on Radio 4 this morning, and he was saying, as Christians, we used to be the establishment, but now we're not the establishment. And the next item on the news was that 300 MPs had written to Parliament to ask for liberalisation of the abortion laws. Okay, that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago. Well, Christianity, the Christian worldview, is no longer dominant in society. We're living in a secular society, in exile effectively, just like Daniel. And Daniel had to negotiate being a man of God